Hello, welcome to Middle Stump with me, Farouk Hussain. We've got a fantastic show for you tonight. And today's topic is all about talent ID and what does good or great actually look like. If you've got any thoughts on what we're discussing this evening, give us a message on whichever platform you're watching. It might be YouTube or Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. And my panel tonight will hopefully be able to answer some of your questions and share their experiences. So joining me today, I've got four guests. It's Christmas, so we've really gone out on a big time tonight. So first of all, I've got with me Ollie Maiden, Head of Academy at Leicestershire County Cricket Club. Welcome, Ollie.
Hi, Farouk. Nice to see you.
Thank you. And also from Leicestershire County Cricket Club, former player and current pathway coach at the county, Jigger Knight. Welcome, Jigger.
Hi, Farouk. Hello, everyone.
Hi, welcome. Thank you. And all the way down in sunny Kent, we've got former England cricketer and current head of talent pathway down there, Min Patel. Welcome, Min.
Good evening, Farouk.
Thank you of you to join us. And last but by no means least, we've got the ECB Performance Director and former ECB Player Identification Lead for the ECB Men's Team, Mo Bobat. Welcome, Mo.
Hi, Farouk. Hi, Rob.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, guys. We're hopefully going to have a very meaningful and fruitful discussion, all based around talent ID. So if I'm going to go to you, Mo, first, obviously talent ID is a phrase that's bandied about a lot these days. Perhaps for the benefit of the parents and the viewers who are not as familiar with it, if you could just elaborate as to what it actually entails.
Yeah, well, quite a tough question to start, really, because the word talent itself evokes quite a lot of debate. Lots of different people have different opinions of that word, and it's used in a lot of different ways. And I suppose if you took like a dictionary definition of it, it probably says something like a natural aptitude or a natural capability, which again many would debate. You know, you've got this whole debate of nature versus nurture, whether it's something that someone's inherited or developed early versus something that's developable. But I'd say for the benefit of the people on this call, it's probably worth thinking of talent as an ability or a capability to do something probably quite well. And I think it's probably most helpful for the listeners to think of it as something that isn't too fixed. It might be something that's developed quite early, and your early experiences might shape that talent. But I think with effort, commitment, and application, it's probably fair to say that it can be developed. How much it can be developed will be different, because certainly, you'll have an innate ability to get so good at something. It doesn't matter how hard I tried, I'm sure I wouldn't be a 100-meter sprinter. So we do have some constraints and capabilities that can't stretch, but in general, for the people on this call who are hopefully high-quality cricketers, I think most of our capabilities should be able to be developed. And if you talk about the word identification, which is pretty obvious, it's finding talent. So coming back to your question, talent identification is about us finding players with capabilities and abilities that we think will go on and be successful in the future.
Would it be fair, Mo, to say that talent in itself comprises of many facets?
Yeah, well, and that's exactly why it's quite a difficult thing to define, really. Exactly that. I suppose it's a combination of some of those physical capabilities and attributes, which you might not be able to do too much about in terms of things like height would be a good example. Could be skill level, and some of those things could be developed early. Some raw attributes like, let's say, hand-eye coordination are a good example of a sort of a talent characteristic that is developed really early. But then many would argue that actually talent also includes your application and your inner drive and your ability to work hard. So I think, in essence, Farouk, everybody has their own definition of talent, and that's why it's something that evokes so much debate. But ultimately, as I said, for the people on this call, it's worth thinking about it as being multifaceted and loads of elements to it, but hopefully something that is relatively developable.
Thanks for that, Mo. Yeah. Min, obviously, you're head of the pathway. And again, pathway is, again, another phrase that's bandied about a lot. Again, just for the benefit of our viewers, if you could just elaborate as to what a pathway actually entails.
Yeah, so basically most county structures will form from a county age group program, the CAGs, shortened for in most cases, and then they extend up to an EPP or an academy, and then that's an extension after that for those that make it into professional cricket. But the pathway essentially covers the spectrum from in my case at Kent, the area program, overseeing parts of the area program, which leads into the CAG program, the CAG age groups, and then up to the academy, and hopefully helping that transition for those players that then go into professional cricket. So pathways are quite a generic term for the whole system, ranging from an age range of, say, let's say 9 to 10 years old through to 18 years old.
Great, thank you for that. Ali, Leicestershire County Cricket Club, obviously you're the head of the academy there, but obviously you will be looking at youngsters from a very, very young age, and I assume sort of from 7, 8, 9 upwards. What is it that you're looking for in a youngster at that particular age, and is it different from what you're looking for in cricketers who's 14, 15, 16 and comes to you?
Yeah, I mean, we generally start our pathways around the country at 11. So our age group squads usually start around the age of 11. And I think I always say, one of my lines to people is, you know, if people can spot a first class or international cricketer at 11, then they're a better man than me, because I think it's very, very difficult at those early ages. So I would say, particularly at the early ages, what we try and do at Leicester is encourage people to be good athletes, well-rounded athletes, you know, and play a multitude of sports. So, you know, what we want is people who've got lots of athletic capability at the younger end, and that, you know, variety of sports, whatever it is. But the more sports you play, the more chance you're going to develop rounded characteristics, jumping, squatting, sprinting, running, everything that's involved in all sports, really. So I think that's the key thing at the young ages is generally, this is a massive generalisation, but the younger cricketers who are better at those sorts of very young ages are usually the ones who've had more coaching than everybody else. So it doesn't always mean it's going to transpire into more success down the line. And actually, from our point of view, we would rather people focus on being good, like I said, rounded athletes. And then when you get older, the 14, 15-year-old stage, like you said, Farouk, you're probably then into more skill-specific, cricket-specific stuff. And I would still certainly encourage people to be playing other sports at that stage, because, you know, again, it's to be a good fielder, which you have to be in the modern game, you know, having a background of other sports and other athletic development is fantastic. So I'd encourage them to play other sports, but obviously at the 14, 15 age groups, particularly with batting, I think you are starting to develop some techniques that then are ingrained for the rest of your life.
I mean, as far as the multi-sports aspect is concerned, I'd certainly concur with your thoughts there, Ali, because you only need to look at someone as like A.B. de Villiers. I mean, he's very, very proficient in hockey and in tennis, and it gives him that versatility when he's out there actually playing cricket, you know, and he plays it very, very well. And I think, obviously, that wider spectrum of sports is a positive as far as he's concerned.
Absolutely. And you know, if you go back 20 years, generally we had a season and an off season, didn't we? So we played cricket in the summer and we played football and rugby and those types of sports in the winter, and that is quite a healthy balance, really. I think, you know, too much cricket and too much of anything is never great. So there's a balance, I believe, in everything. And cricket, you know, can be very linear, straight lines. You know, bowlers run up in straight lines and bowl. Batsmen's all about straight lines when you're facing the ball. Can be very linear. So playing sports that involve more sideways lateral movement, agility sports are fantastic for cricket development.
Yeah, Farouk, just to come in on that, if I could. Yeah, Ali makes a really important point around multi-sports, and you know what we want from our, you know, by the time players are senior professionals or internationals, we want guys who can adapt to different pressurized scenarios. And those scenarios change all the time. And the ones that adapt quickest are the ones that tend to be most successful. And ultimately, that ability to adapt comes from a breadth of experiences. You know, there's a bit of a phrase around talent ID and talent development, which is breadth of experience equals breadth of transfer. So if guys have a range of experiences, whether that's multi-sports or even within cricket, multi-disciplines, that means that when they're faced with different scenarios and challenges further down the road, they can actually cope with those different circumstances and demands. So I totally endorse what Ali's saying around those different experiences, particularly complementary sports, where, you know, in our world, we're talking hand-eye coordination in particular, but not just that. Those complementary sports are absolutely critical, actually, and they can make a huge difference. And I think specialising in a sport as late as possible, I think, is really helpful.
Great stuff. Jigger, I want to come to you next. Obviously, you're of our panel, you're the most recently retired former cricketer from the first class game. So obviously, you know, your memory is probably still a bit fresher than Min's. No disrespect to Min. But how do you see the change as far as this whole sort of talent aspect, identifying talent, nurturing talent? How is it different now than, for say, perhaps when you started out on your first class journey as a young cricketer?
I think it's always been. I mean, I was always encouraged to play different sports, sort of try and adapt my game and develop my game in other aspects and other areas as well, rather than just cricket. I was quite fortunate that I always had lifts and stuff to the ground at Grace Road, where I could easily get to sort of the facilities where it allowed me to train. I know at the moment there aren't sort of, well, some people aren't so fortunate to sort of have that opportunity. So there's a lot more. So going back to your question, for it, there's a lot more focus on the fitness aspects of things right now than I first started. Definitely, when I first started, the fitness element wasn't there as much. And I'll just talk to you about my experience at Leicester. There was my first 3 or 4 years at Leicester, we didn't really have an S&C coach. It was usually the physiotherapist who looked after that side of things. And then sort of midway through my career, there was S&C started to get employed, and they sort of took over the program. So I think in that aspect, certainly in terms of nutrition and fitness, that certainly changed. I
mean, as far as S&C is concerned, how big a factor is it now in the modern day cricketer with the development of far more athletic fielders and, you know, the ability to hit balls much further? As a talent identifier, how much emphasis do you put on that with the players that you're looking at, Mo? If I can just come to you on that one.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty obvious answer. Ultimately, the best players do things other people can't. So that includes physical capabilities. That could be bowling it faster than others or hitting it further than others. And the best players also do it more often. So you got to be able to repeat. And if you're repeating, that takes endurance. So for me, it's a pretty obvious answer. It's often overlooked. Yeah, so for me, it's a pretty straightforward answer, really. Being able to do something good once is great, but the best do it and repeat it and they back it up. So for me, yeah, if you want to do things that others can't do, and if you want to do them more often than others, then you're going to have to be fit and strong, really.
Farouk, can I just jump in on that?
Yep. Of course you can.
I think we have to clarify that when we talk about fitness and S&C, certainly around pathway, people almost box that as something that's oh, there's my cricket, there's my fitness. Actually, we need to get people to understand that being physically fitter, aerobically fitter is a complementary asset to your skill. And therefore, as we go back to what Mo was saying, it allows you to maybe demonstrate that skill for longer and better. And I think people get very isolated with what fitness is. They think it's a separate part of just having to be a cricketer. No, it's a complementary piece to your thing that allows you to display your assets for better and longer. And I think that's a point worth making.
So would you say there's a direct correlation between health and fitness and the ability to concentrate for longer periods of the game? Because you could sort of throw that on its head by saying, well, actually, people were batting for 2, 3, 4 sessions in a test match before there was such an emphasis on health and fitness as it is in the modern game. So is it really that big a factor in the mental concentration aspect of a modern day cricketer?
I'll just point you back to Ben Stokes at the World Cup, being able to make great decisions under pressure, under serious fatigue at the end of a long tournament. And if you want a clear and valid example of how modern day cricketers' physical fitness and ability to think under pressure, Ben Stokes getting England home in the World Cup final. I don't know, Mo, if that was where you were going, but that's me, and I'll hand it over to you.
No, I was going to say you stole the example I was going to use, and it's a perfect one. You know, we probably all watched the World Cup final. Our 2 fittest players in that team were probably Ben Stokes and Josh Butler. No surprise, they're the 2 that got us as close to winning or got us over the line, pretty much. So I remember all of us sat there watching at Lords thinking, God, if you wanted two guys out there who had the physical capability to deal with that at the end of a World Cup, but also, like Min said, being physically fit often means that there's some mental fitness as well, because inevitably when you push your body to extremes, you're often just left with your mind. So, and if that's the case, then your mind develops resilience too. And that's not the only way you develop resilience, but it does connect. So, yeah, look, totally endorse the point that Min said. And certainly that was a great example of two of our fittest players, almost without question, doing the business when it mattered most under pressure and being able to think clearly under pressure.
Just on that. Sorry, just on that from personal experience as well. I was unfit as a kid, to be honest. And then later on in my career, the fitter I got, I found that it helped me in terms of focusing more for longer periods of time. So I echo exactly what Mo and Min said there as well.
Ali, at the Leicestershire Academy, obviously when the youngsters come in, what sort of education programs do you put in place to make them realise the value and the benefits of health and fitness and strength and conditioning? But also, I'm going to expand the discussion onto diet and nutrition as well.
Well, we've now, in most counties, we're very lucky again, back as Jigga was describing before, things have changed massively even over the last 5 years. And counties now, we've got a head of S&C, but we've got an assistant S&C, so a strength and conditioning coach who works with all the pathway. So he works, Jigga and the team, we're out with the boys on Friday night doing a outdoors fielding and athleticism session on an artificial pitch, and we do a lot of work to try and make sure we can help the kids get support in that area, and a lot of education from that point of view as well. So they're lucky because they've got people around them. So that's the first thing. They've got a designated person who can help them. Obviously, Jigga, we've got great staff. So I've got Jigga, Dave Whitmore, Paul Johnson. I've got physio, Ryan Smith. We've got great staff who can really support players, and that's a big difference from Jigga's day, really. And going on Mo's point and Min's point, that's another reason why I would encourage the multi-sport facets of development at younger ages, is because athleticism is so important. The fitness element, and I would use the term athleticism, so important in the modern game. And the best way to do that is by doing it in a fun way, where you're playing and enjoying yourself. Because the last thing an 11-year-old and 12-year-old wants to do is go on a treadmill and run. But if that's in a game of hockey or whatever it might be, that's a fantastic way to develop fitness. So that's, again, supports my thing about multi-sports, is that you have the ability to work on your fitness and athleticism in a fun way. And we always talk about fit for purpose as being the most important thing. So it's not about just being fit and strong. It's about, if you want to bowl fast, as Mo said before, you're going to have to be fit enough to do that. And if you want to bat for long periods of time and field well, it's all about fit for purpose, really, is the key. In terms of nutrition, again, it's an education that we try and fulfill. So we did a Zoom call 2 weeks ago at Leicester, where we had the head S&C and Ed ran an education course around nutrition and what the good things are to eat pre-training, post-training, match morning, breakfast, all those type of things, and then use Jigga. So Jigga gets rolled out for us as our not a guinea pig, but as our person to help. So he gets rolled out, and then he gets to talk about when he was playing and he had beans on toast every morning.
I mean, talking of obviously nutrition and diet, I mean, the classic example that springs to mind for me is someone like Samit Patel, who was often accused of not being very, very careful about his diet and nutrition, and that was often bandied around as being a reason as why he didn't win as many international honours. But I suppose you could go back in time, Min, people like Mike Gattin and people from that era who obviously, liked to tuck into the tea and were hoping that they were batting second in the innings, so they could sort of have a bit of a doze after meat pie, chips, gravy, and a pudding as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, Gat's era was entirely different era. I overlapped both of those guys, and I was with Gat at the start of my career, and as Jigga alluded to there, fitness was very much not on that for pre-season training, and by the time I finished my career, it very much was. So you know, they're personal choices. They're choices you make in life, and that's Sam's choice. And he's got a trophy cabinet full of medals. So, you know, you can say fair play to him with international caps. For me, I always wanted to play cricket. I hated fitness, but I went and did what Ali was saying. I played rugby very poorly. I played football very poorly. I played badminton quite well, but all of these things were a means to not to play those sports, but to actually get myself better conditioned. And actually it helped me with my cognitive thinking and making decisions when you're playing sports that ask questions of you to make quick decisions. So rugby and football and things like that helped me, and they were actually a much more enjoyable way of becoming fitter without actually having to do the treadmill run that he alluded to. And that's my journey. I hated it, but I did it.
And also, for the demands of the games have changed significantly as well. You know, the volume of cricket that's played now. Well, you only have to look at this summer. We were playing concurrent series. You know, like fielding 2 teams at the same time. You could be switching immediately from one series, test series, or format to another. Different corners of the world, significant amounts of travel. Again, if you're playing at the highest level, you're then fitting in franchise cricket and domestic cricket as well. If you want to sustain that, and a playing career is a pretty short career, you know, if you want to sustain that for 10, 12 or 15 years and play at the highest level, you're not going to do it by not being fit. So Min's right, you know, there's been an evolution of sorts and everything evolves. You know, I'm sure you could say the same about Premier League football from 20 years ago. Things evolve and things change, but almost certainly now the demands on the game suggest that you can't afford to overlook it. And again, just to repeat what I think someone said earlier, probably Min, I think that there's no benefit to seeing fitness as something different to your cricket. That is your cricket, basically. If you want to execute your skills well and for long enough, you're not going to do it without being fit. So it's a foundation. Separating it is probably something that we need to stop doing.
Jigger, obviously there's been the traditional route into cricket whereby you've sort of played for your club as a junior, maybe got into the senior team, and then made it into the county pathway system. From your experience, there will be probably, you'll have seen some of your counterparts maybe fall by the wayside who you classed maybe as being good players when they're 13, 14, 15. Do you think there's some mileage in exploring other avenues into the game rather than just going down the one path route and thereby sort of discounting the late developers?
Sorry, say that again. Lost you.
Sorry. Well, I was saying basically I'll just to paraphrase, was that the traditional route of getting into county cricket has been sort of playing for your club as a junior and then being spotted and maybe going on to the junior county pathway. And obviously you may have had players who played with you who were decent players, but obviously for whatever reason, they didn't quite make it for selection as 13, 14-year-olds and then sort of fell on the scrap heap effectively. Do you think there's some mileage in exploring other avenues? So by doing more than one approach, we're not missing out on the late developers in the game.
100%. I think if you take my example, so I started playing at 15. I was a late developer myself. My first contract was only at 22. So if you look at it that way, I'll take myself as an example where I was lost to the game between the ages of 18 to 20. And I sort of tried to find another avenue in, and the other avenue in for me was going to Loughborough Uni. So I was on the MCCU, which was what it was called back then. So that was my sort of avenue into it. Things changed at Leicester, and suddenly I got called into a few training sessions, and everything worked out well from there. So 100% in terms of it's not just a closed door or a fixed avenue. There's multiple entries into or avenues into the way into county or first class cricket.
That's the key phrase for it, multiple entry and exit points. So a sign of a healthy pathway is exactly that, multiple entry and exit points, because people develop at different rates. Some go quicker, some go slower. One intervention or one life experience can totally change someone's rate and speed of development. So people should have the capability to find their feet, settle, struggle, excel. Like that's just learning, that's development. So Jigger's totally right. You know, the best pathways have multiple entry and exit points where selection with talent isn't too fixed, and you know there's enough scope for people to adapt and change.
On that I think it's really important actually for Farouk to disappear. Actually, where's he gone? I think it's really important that parents and the lads on this call understand what current readiness is against future potential, because they're always going, my son has done this at that level, etc., etc. We're also working to a future potential subjective view of what they might look like. So you might not look like the finished article or as good as someone else in the team, but actually we might see something that we think in 2 years' time worth of development we can advance to a position where you're going to be an academy player. So I think current readiness versus future potential, coupled with the multiple entry and exploits, I mean, there's so many different ways of actually getting into a system. It's not a linear path. For very few it is, but for most people it isn't a linear path at all.
It's something I keep having min with since I started in the role last January, so a year now. One of the things I've had to reiterate a lot with parents and players is, first of all, not to compare them each other, because as Mo said, you know, everyone's journey is different and comparison's never healthy, because everybody changed, you know, everybody's an individual in the world, let alone in terms of their cricket development. So that's the one thing. And also that, you know, that I think people, again, in pathways now, because we've put hierarchical system, you know, steps in place, EPPs and academies, people just want to get onto the next rung all the time because someone else is there and they want to catch up. And I've said a lot over the last 12 months that, you know, lots of players play first class cricket, as Jigger did, without being on a county academy. And as long as Mo said, there is ways in terms of the pathway through club cricket, through university cricket, through minor counties cricket. That's a really healthy situation. And people like Jigger, I think, you know, Jigger rowed his own boat, really. He had to find his own way. And I believe there's a lot of scope in people having to fight for what they get. And actually, those that often end up being the ones that you can really hang your hat on. So I think Jigger's experience is fantastic. And I would just encourage all players and parents to make sure that they play the game to enjoy it and to compete and to win games of cricket, not to get on the next rung of the ladder, which I think is something that we have to fight against all the time, really.
I think, look, if I go back to Ken, we've got currently 3 really live examples of different pathways, and I'll do it briefly, is that you've got someone like Jordan Cox, who's now gone into the first team, but he went through the Kent system, into the EP, into the academy, and the pro contract and first team, and that's a very linear pathway. Zach Crawley actually similarly, but probably missed out on the England stuff, and but again has dominated the parts he had to dominate and moved up the ladder. And then we've got a guy called Marcus O'Reilly who's playing alongside those guys, who actually at the age of 18 came off our academy, went back into clubland, had 18 months and went to Australia for a winter and actually did the Jigger thing, rowed his own boat and found his way. So we've got 3 guys that are all playing alongside each other in first class cricket. One's gone to international level, but they've all had 3 different routes to get to the same point.
Yeah, and as Ali said, we can be guilty of accelerating development. Like, it's a phrase that you often hear from coaches and leaders, and it's a very dangerous one, actually. I don't think we just want to get to the same endpoint quicker. We want to improve someone's capability when they get there. So it's important that we deepen players' development, and then they get delivered when they get delivered. You know, it's a timely thing as opposed to an accelerated thing. So, and again, the system's quite guilty, Farouk, of being obsessed with accelerating development. It's a term that's used quite a lot, and you know, we get it conceptually. You know, we want them to get there as quickly as they can, but I don't think it's a rush. You know, ultimately, we want to make sure that when they get there, they're capable of doing really great things.
Obviously,
just on that as well. Sorry, Farouk. Just personal experience. I think there's 4 years out of the game for me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. It allowed me to find myself. It allowed me to sort of live by myself a little bit, find out about sort of where I want to go. Just that other side of not just cricket, it was the other aspects that all came around cricket as well. So I know in a way that I was gutted I didn't make the Leicestershire under-19s or whatever it was back then, but it allowed me to sort of find myself a lot more about myself. So
I think that finding yourself thing is the difference between liking the idea, which I think a lot of lads like the idea of being a professional cricketer. And then when you find yourself, you go, actually, I really want to be a professional cricketer. And you understand the difference between liking the idea of it and actually, I need to go to the next level with my commitment to various other things that we've talked about. And that 4 years might have been where Jigger's turned around and gone, I really, really want this. Actually, I loved the idea when I was 18. Now I really want it, and then you set your goal out to do it.
Is there a danger of the sort of the cricket talent search mindset becoming very much like the football one, whereby we've got kids who are sort of 9, 10, 11 years old, and they're basically on the football scrap heap because the academies have taken them on from when they're 6 and 7, and they've binned them by the time they're 9, 10, 11. And obviously, that can have a huge emotional scar on those youngsters, and it might even sort of prevent them from ever coming back to the game again, Ali.
And that I think we have to fight against that sort of system. I think first of all, cricket counties don't have the money that football clubs have, so there's obviously that element to it. But we have to fight. You know, I'm very, very passionate that we allow people to play other sports, that we're not precious in that way, that we allow people to grow and develop in their own time, that we have opportunities for them to come in to the pathway at various times, and that we're not closed enough in Leicestershire to think that players have to go through the county academy and become a scholar, an academy scholar, then on to second team cricket and follow that route, because that isn't, you know, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go on to be first class cricketers. The academy is there to provide people with the opportunity, and also to hopefully, if we do it right, to do some of the things that Min and Jigger have suggested, which is to actually educate and help people grow as people, so that actually they decide that cricket is the thing they're going to strive for. So that's what we're there for, and I believe that my job is not to be just focused on those 11 players that I've got in the academy, but to be open to all those other players that are in the pathway, and they're all our players, and everyone in Leicestershire has a chance and opportunity to play first class cricket if they want it.
I mean, focusing specifically just for this question on the BAME background and the youngsters who want to play cricket from those backgrounds, Jigger, and then I'll come to Min on the same sort of theme. Do you find that there are specific barriers that inhibit their progress coming from a BAME background as opposed to a non-BAME background, Jigger?
I can only sort of speak from experience. One of my biggest challenges was to try and get to training sessions. My dad used to work 6 till 6, so my sort of transport into the ground was very difficult. So I sort of worked out a way where I'd either bike it in, so cycle in, or sort of bus it in, or just try and scrounge a lift of anyone I could, really, just to get to the ground and play about an hour's worth of cricket. So I think that was the biggest barrier for me. Another thing is facilities where I lived. It was usually just a case of either playing cricket in the backyard or going to the park with a bunch of mates. There was no cut wickets or cut turf where I could sort of play games with or play with people. So facilities and sort of transport were my biggest backgrounds. And I went to a school where cricket wasn't really played either. So it was played more towards the back end of it, but at the start it wasn't. So a few things there, which from personal experience.
I mean, if I could just go to you, obviously you were successful enough and fortunate enough to have played for the England national side. And obviously there will have been your peers from a similar perhaps background to yourself at the time who never made it. So are you able to sort of shed some light on maybe some of the reasons why they didn't make it, being from the BAME community, and you did make it, being from a similar community?
To be fair, I was probably at the start of the generation of cricketers where there started to be an influx of Asian professional cricketers. Myself, Aftab Habib, Mark Ram, Prakash Nasser, and these guys, and we were probably that first generation where there was starting to become an influx. The challenges that I had or didn't have, I can't recall any that were obstacles that stopped me progressing. I had a committed set of parents that drove me relentlessly to practice and matches, which only later down the line you realise how grateful you are for the commitments they put into your development, which you don't do at the time. I had access in Kent. I had access to a schooling that played a good standard of cricket. But going back to the linear pathway, I actually only played 2 games of cricket for Kent in the pathway before I dominated in club cricket and got my opportunity through second. So my journey wasn't through the standard procedure of playing Kent 11s through 18s. It was like it went. Nowadays, going back to the question you asked Jigger, we have issues really in terms of talent IDing in some of the BAMEs. Certainly in Kent, if I look at my challenges in the pathway, we have high BAME communities in southeast London and also in an area called Gravesend. Are we able to get in there and actually really get to town with some talent IDing where there's no doubt some raw talent and some talented cricketers, but we can't even get them to cricket centres locally with the, domestic problems they might have around lifts, as Jigger was alluding to. So, and then the other thing is about connectivity. If they do get into a Kent pathway, how well are we at connecting with those communities in terms of Asian coaches? We don't probably have enough in the Kent system, and that's me being honest about my pathway. Is if I really want to, our percentages are in all pathways. I think Ali would allude to, is that the Asian communities are actually getting a higher concentration in all county pathways generally where there is Asian population. We're not probably got enough Asian coaches to help that connectivity and create that link. Those are some of the challenges I'd say currently.
Mo, Jigger just touched upon education and his schooling. I mean, do you feel that there's a correlation between your education and your ultimate sort of progression to the elite sport at the top level? And I'll give you the example that in the second test versus Pakistan this summer, Zach Crawley was one of 9 players in that team to have attended private school. So is that a big factor in whether a youngster actually makes it to the very, very top?
Well, look, the first thing to say on any numbers related to private and state school backgrounds is that it's slightly skewed data. It's probably still skewed further than we would like it to be, but it's skewed data because a number of those players will have started in a state school and probably got a scholarship to go to a private school. And I don't think there's many of us that would turn down a scholarship for our children, regardless of their background. So firstly, I don't read into some of those numbers too specifically. But I think the argument still stands true that we would like more of our players to be able to access great cricketing opportunities in state schools. I don't think any of us would debate that. And having been a teacher myself, I know exactly what's happened to state school cricket in a period when summer terms have got shorter and shorter, high pressure on exams during that summer term period, no access to facilities. Like Jigger said, I went to Crown Hill schools in Leicester. There might be people on the call who went to that school or who are at that school now. And back when I was there, we certainly didn't have goals, football facilities and all the stuff that they've got now. We had one AstroTurf cricket pitch that was covered in bird poo, if I'm honest with you, and that was as good as it got. So look, there's a number of barriers and reasons why. And then you look at some of the players who've gone to really good fee-paying schools and they get outstanding cricketing opportunities. So firstly, it doesn't surprise me, Farouk, that we have players that come through that system, and we shouldn't look on it as a bad thing that they do, but we should still try and achieve the opposite. We should have state school cricket thriving if we can, so that we can just grow our talent pool. Doesn't mean because you're coming from a private school background that it's a bad thing and we should look on that badly. Some of those schools do a great job and put on a great cricket program, but if we can extend that to state schools, I think that's what we should be trying to do. And I do know that the ECB through the next sort of strategic cycle are really looking to prioritise that, and I think we need to is the honest point. So look, in answer to your question, I think it is a factor. The data doesn't always tell the truth. You have to look at our World Cup. You look at our World Cup squad of 15 who competed through that World Cup. 8 of them came from state school background, 7 from private schools. Now that's still a higher split than national splits, but it's still a relatively healthy representation, in terms of balance. So there's always multiple ways of looking at that. But in short, I'd love to see state school cricket thriving a bit more than it is.
Thank you, Mo, for that. Guys, I'm just going to have about 5 minutes more chat between ourselves. Then we're going to go to the questions because the questions are piling up. There's a lot of people who want to ask you guys lots of interesting things. So we will spend another 5 minutes or so just chatting amongst ourselves. Just want to go on to the conventional versus the unconventional, because obviously when you're identifying talent, and as you obviously will know yourselves, that many of the BAME community, particularly the South Asian heritage, do tend to play a lot of street cricket, tape ball cricket through projects such as Chance to Shine. And you come across a talented individual who may not be playing the game in a conventional way. So would you sort of look to embrace what he's got to offer, Ali? Or would you sort of say, well, actually, he doesn't conform to the methods and the approaches that we subscribe to for someone to come into our academy? Which approach would you adopt?
Well, it has to be the latter, doesn't it? I mean, the sport is a skill-based sport, and I always talk to the coaches at Leicester. We always talk about method over technique, and that's something that's really important to us. Is we want skillful cricketers. That ultimately is the most important thing. I think that the lines have been blurred, haven't they, recently? And again, you go back to your chat about fitness and all. And I think over the last 10 years, particularly coaches, I think have been swayed by people who are physically, maybe physically fit, but maybe don't quite have the same skill level because they show those attributes. And we've got to make sure that we don't have any bias towards, anything really in coaching. We've got to be open to lots of different types of cricketers, and that's the absolute key to it all. And I would say the answer to your question, Farouk, is we want skill. We want people who've got high skill, who've got methods that can do things in the game. Someone said to me, a coach said to me that technical models have always been there for players to break, and I do believe that. The idea of a technical model has always been there for players to challenge and move the game, because they're always trying to find a competitive edge and move the game forward. They're always trying to do something in the game that's different to what's been done before. And our job and our challenge in this country is to make sure that we're not too traditional in what we look for, and that we, people have always said, haven't they, Wooden, Malinga and Muralitharan have got through, being in England. And I hope in Leicester, now they would have done. I don't know, I can't speak for, the last 10 years really, but particularly, we've got to try and make sure we're not biased towards anything really, and be open to the outcome. The outcome of what people can actually do on the cricket pitch is the key to it all, really.
Just on that as well, I went to a few tape ball sessions, and we've actually picked out a few guys where we've allowed them that platform and time to sort of develop. And I was taken aback by the skill that they showed there. It was really, really good to see.
And that, I mean, Farouk, I was going to talk in your last question about that. I think coaching's about relationships, isn't it? And it's about a bond with players, and it's about players and you having a connection. And particularly, I'm lucky because I've got Jigger now in the pathway. We've got Dips Patel, who's a second team coach. And as Mo said, those characters in the BAME communities are so important, because I'm not, I do my very best, and I'm sure, there's a lot of South Asian cricketers in my system that I get on really well with and work with brilliantly. But I'm also not naive enough to know that the impact that Jigger can have with those players is so immense because of the connection he has with his background and what he's gone through. And we have to have more cricketers from diverse backgrounds, more coaches from diverse backgrounds, to be able to communicate and help find those players and help them come through. It's just so important.
Okay, guys, we'll move on to the viewer questions now. So I'll go to Min with the first one. Then obviously, if any of you else wants to chip in, feel free to do so. I'll try and put it up on the screen as well then. I'll read it out because some of them are quite lengthy. Min, Shaquille's asking, how much does mindset play in Talent ID?
Thanks, Shaquille. I'm assuming Shaquille means a player's mindset. And in terms of ID, that's one of those hidden qualities I think we talked about, or Mo talked right at the top of the program about the character and the inner drive. And those are the hidden things. And mindset is only something you see when you put them into competitive environments and put them under pressure. So obviously it's a really important facet of being a successful cricketer, because your mindset is the thing that's going to allow you to potentially grow, develop, not sit still and accept where you're at. But it's also going to hopefully get you in a position where you're able to get the team over the line under pressure. So mindset's not the easily identifiable part of ID, but it's something you learn to see as you watch that person play under pressure, I think.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one from Sam. And Sam's asking, Mo, if you want to take this one for us, please. Obviously, technology is now a big part of the game. Certainly from the ECB point of view, are you able to shed some light on what technology is used to measure athlete training?
Well, yeah, before I talk specifically about technology, it's worth saying that best practice talent identification or player identification normally encompasses two features. Firstly, it's a longitudinal data set. So what I mean by that is you've got information about players over a long period of time, because we know that it's important to understand that training and development and performance history. So longitudinal data is quite important. And secondly, holistic data is important. So we want a rounded picture of the player. We want to understand them technically, tactically, physically, psychologically, mentally, lifestyle, team environments, the lot. So if you take those two principles in mind, it will give you a bit of a steer as to what type of data we collect. So that would include performance statistics and data, video analysis, scouting data, and in the best terms, that would be independent, objective information from scouts. And we have that from an ECB perspective, aggregated on a scouting platform with dashboards and all sorts of stuff. We have fitness data, and some of that is sort of minimum expectations, but some of that is also performance outputs that we know can take people to another level. We do quite a lot of work in trying to understand people's character and their psychology as well, whether that's things like pressure profiling, well-being screenings, so on. And then we've also got, I suppose when you look at data itself, typically, and cricket's a data-rich sport, because just, even if you look at a scoreboard or a scorecard in cricket, it's very different to football for obvious reasons. So it's a data-rich sport, but most data that we have, at best, makes us what I would call objective historians. So we're basically got numbers that tell us what's happened in the past. So as good as it gets is we're objective historians. What we're trying to move towards is be predictors. So looking forward, which is very different. And we're starting to get to the territory now where, because we've done stuff systematically for a reasonable amount of time, we're starting to work out what discriminatory data there is between those who have gone on and those who haven't. Or even transferability. A good example is county cricket looks very different to international cricket. So how can you assess players at county level and make a prediction about international cricket? Well, we're starting to be able to do that through some sophisticated analytics. So look, I could probably spend hours and hours talking about that question, and probably will go over the heads of a lot of people on this call, and maybe myself included at times. But in essence, we use a lot of technology to capture those two things, really, the longitudinal journey and a holistic profile, whether that's stats, video, profiles, whatever it might be.
And so I suppose that sort of goes back to the comments that you quoted, Mo, as making that county cricket alone won't produce international cricketers. So there's more to it than just the runs that they score and the wickets that they take.
Well, yeah, and it's important because I've been pulled up on that quote quite a few times, and it's important to qualify one word. The most important word is alone. Some people read it as county cricket won't produce international cricketers, which isn't what I said. County cricket alone won't produce international cricketers, and it probably takes something else. It takes a bit of international exposure, maybe a bit of adversity. Maybe it takes, like Jigger's, example of, or get out of the game for a bit and find your feet and learn about yourself. Like, whatever it takes. But I'll give you some good examples. In first-class cricket, on average, something like 20% of the bowling. In fact, I'll give a spin bowling one because we've got two high-quality spinners on our panel in Jigger and Min. Something like 19 or 20% of the bowling in first-class cricket is spin. At international cricket, it's in excess of 40%, and it's in much more difficult conditions. So if you're a batsman playing first-class cricket, 20% of the bowling you face is spin, and it's probably nowhere near as difficult as it is in international cricket. So for us to think that all of a sudden we're going to have players with no extra support or intervention that are just going to, the cream will just rise to the top and we'll have loads of fantastic players that can play spin, or even lots of bowlers that can do it. Well, why would that be the case? It defies logic. So therefore, we need to be really smart around finding players at the right time, giving them real challenging experiences in difficult conditions with the ball turning and men round the bat and lots of rough, different bounces. And then we need to provide them with high levels of support as well. And then hopefully they'll grow, and we'll find out, we'll learn from watching them. And a lot of the guys now, you look at the England team, I think we're quite fortunate. We've got a lot of guys who play spin really well, but that isn't a coincidence. They've spent a significant amount of time training in specific conditions overseas. And I think that's why. So that's just one example, but I could give the same examples for pace bowling and so on. So yeah, being able to predict is quite difficult because often the environment that you're looking in isn't the same as the environment that you're picking for.
You'll be pleased to know, Mo, that I did have the word alone in my notes here.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so obviously I've been doing my research as well, and either you've got a very good memory or you've got that article that you were quoting on in front of you. Because again, the example of the spin bowling and then the examples of the bouncers faced in cricket and so on were in that article. Thank you very much for that input. I wanted to go on to another question here now. We've got, it's on the mindset again. We'll go to Ali on this one. It's about the age groups and how do you develop the mental and the game mindset side of the game. It's from Mahindra Singh. I don't think it's MS Dhoni, though. Maybe. You never know. Anybody who also is watching this show.
No pressure, Ali.
No, yeah. I think it's something that, I mean, we generally, because you've got people like Jigger, you know, I've got Jigger working with the under-12s and the under-13s. So because you've got experienced coaches who know the game, I think what we would do is, I always believe that the mental aspects of the game is best done by a coach, generally, because it's in context, it's in its real life situations. So we have really good coaches who deliver that side of the game, and you know, Jigger's on his level 4 currently, and the level 4 program is brilliant for helping you understand bits about the mental aspects of the game. So coaches are well educated now in that aspect. We then have a psych who works a number of days a year, usually with the academy, the scholarship players higher up. So that happens. But one of the big things I believe, when Min was talking before, you know, I've seen last year we had a number of games where when you have junior teams and then you come to play against adult opposition, basically the one thing that gets exposed or highlighted is often the younger lads are much higher skill level in terms of what they actually possess, but they lose because of the mental aspects and the competitiveness when they play against men. And so I'm a big believer in young cricketers playing against men's teams because of the nature of the competitiveness. And I think, going back to what Min was saying before, one of the things you can't teach but you need to expose young players to is that competitiveness, because ultimately you can have all the skills and do all the drills you want to in the nets, but when you go to play an adult and in adult cricket, it's basically you versus the bowler, you know, batter versus bowler, and the one who competes the hardest is probably going to come out on top.
Farouk, can I add a little bit on? For me, that's a really, really important point Ali's made. The exponential learning that you get when you start playing men's cricket as a pathway player at 15, 14, 15, 16, you can have all the technical stuff that you want, but actually starting to understand how to find gaps or how to bowl a different way. The exponential learning around your thinking around cricket is such a key thing when you start entering men's cricket. The key to that is also make sure you're playing at the right level of men's cricket, where you're not either thrown in too deep and can't cope, or you're playing in a 5th or 6th 11 and it's too easy. You need to be finding the right platform for your cricket, and also having the right support guys around to help learn out of it. If you get that, men's cricket is an exceptional learning tool for 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, I think.
And you would have played Min with a lot of those, the great players and against the great players. You know, people always talk about Shane Warne as being, you know, this great spin bowler, and he himself says he got a lot of balls with his straight ball. And actually, when you played Shane Warne, you played the fella he was, and it's the competitiveness that he brings. And that you can't teach that, but it's so important to success in the game. Is you have to fight for your success against your opponent, because that's what sport is about.
Yeah, on that, I mean, relevant was a couple of weeks ago or last week, we had Ian Bell as a batting coach with the Young Lions, and Belly was talking about his experience, and he still said on his first series against Australia, and this is no guy who's playing international cricket, he still played Warne and McGrath rather than the ball that was coming at him. And this is a guy that's been through the first class system. He's now an international cricketer, and he got to a point where he was still able to, he was still playing Shane Warne, the man, and not the delivery that was coming out of his hand. So it's not an overnight process. It's something you learn to deal with and you cope with. And the earlier I think you get thrown into that, I think the better equipped you'll be.
And just flip right back to the start, Min, I just remember something Mo said, is how important that playing other sports is to your ability to react to situations and deal with pressure and compete with people. It can often come from experiences outside of cricket.
I mean, one of the questions that's asked by one of our viewers, obviously I've not put it up on the screen yet, is obviously what sports should you play? Are there any specific sports that would help you to become a more rounded cricketer? Or is there anything in particular that jumps out at you?
Well, I'd say, look, at a young age, lots of different sports. I think they all have complementary benefits. Just one thing to be slightly mindful of as you get into probably 15, 16 and 17, sports that have significant physical contact obviously poses risk. So if you're going to play rugby as a 17 and 18-year-old, you've got to accept the fact that it's highly likely you'll pick up injuries. So I think if we're talking about young players and we're talking about early teens, well, as many different sports as possible, whether they're a balance of some hand-eye coordination sports like hockey and racket sports are really good, but also things that I think Ali mentioned earlier, lateral movement. So hockey's a good one for that. You get into low squatting positions and you move side to side quite a lot. I think that's great. It's great for your physicality. So I would say any of those sports are really good. I often think things like, I remember when I was a kid, like if you ever did things like gymnastics at school, you'd have been like, God, I've got no interest in that. If I could go back and do my childhood again, I know how valuable something like that would be for mobility, range of movement, recovery, plasticity of your muscles and power generation, all that sort of stuff. But you don't realise it when you're young. So in answer to your question, Farouk, I think when you're young, as many different sports as possible, throw yourself in and see the benefit of it. As you get a bit older, you do have to probably think a little bit more about impact because of the injuries and time loss. So we certainly, when we have players at under 19 level, we start to limit things like football and rugby because of the volume of, or even other high risk sort of winter sports and things like that. But we want them to keep playing racket sports at that age. But until then, as many different sports as possible, I'd say would be great.
But you let them warm up and then they're playing football, so that's okay then, Mo.
Well, we definitely don't let them play football in warm-ups.
Jigger, obviously, you've experienced the highs and lows of sort of professional cricket. Obviously, parents have a lot of high expectations of their child, and every, parent wants their child to make it, particularly in this modern era of cricket where there are huge riches to be gained through franchise cricket. But how do you manage expectation and the disappointments of their child if they don't actually progress and make it?
It's a difficult one, that really, isn't it? I think you've got to allow the individual to sort of take his own course, rather than being too pushy. I think at the minute we see a lot. Some parents are quite pushy from experience. I was quite lucky in the sense that my mum and dad really didn't mind what I'd done. As long as I got some sort of degree with me, that they were quite happy with the way I chose sort of which way to go. So again, it's a difficult one. If anyone wants to help me out on that one, it's just.
I think I'll help you, Jig, a little bit. So I would encourage parents to see it, and I would encourage. I wish I'm talking like Mo. I wish I could go back and have my cricket childhood back again, because when people tell you that every failure is a learning opportunity, that is genuinely the case. And when I batted when I was a kid, I saw every failure as a missed opportunity, and it hurt me. But I genuinely, we've heard what Mo said about people who have setbacks. Generally the people who have setbacks or have to fight for things are the ones who come out stronger in the end. So if your child doesn't get onto a program at any point, then the only thing to encourage is that they learn from it and that they get better and that they use it to fuel their fire to get to be a professional cricketer if that's what they want. But ultimately, it can't cripple them. They have to love the game, love playing, and love that part of trying to get better all the time. And don't worry about. Jigger said he didn't get on a pathway until he was later on. There's lots of people. It's not the end of the world as long as they play cricket to love it and enjoy it and compete.
So every disappointment I received was a hurdle for me to try and overcome. So I didn't like someone saying to me that you can't do it. It was more of a case of, right, if I can't do it, I'm going to show you that I can do it. That sort of thing. Again, like Ali said, it was about overcoming your failures and turning them into positives.
Men?
Yeah, I just want to add, I think it's really important how that disappointment or that news is brought about. And I think that's the key. We talked about earlier about multiple entry and exit points. I think when you get to an exit point, as a system, we have to provide that safety net. If you don't provide that safety net and you drop the kid out, it's very hard for any parent to manage the disappointment. If you actually go back with clarity around the decision, and they might not like the decision, but they understand why that decision was made, then you've got a far greater chance of that kid being upset for a few days, then coming back and doing a Jigger thing and I'm going to overcome that, I'm going to prove you wrong, which is what you want to see in all cases. I think how you deliver the news is absolutely critical to how that disappointment can be handled by the parent.
Okay, we'll go on to a question from Prash, and he's asking about talent versus the technical aspect of the game. I know we've sort of touched upon it a little bit already, Ali, when we talked about if they're playing the game and the skills there, then obviously you got something to work with there. But obviously, if you come in this one, Mo, if you don't mind, development can be achieved in many ways via coaches and realizing talent. How much is the percentage taken talent versus the technical? Where's the balance between talent and technical? I know you've talked about looking forward as to where this player is going to be in 2-3 years time and not necessarily focusing so much on the current, but how much of your mindset is occupied by the talent versus
Yeah, bit of a cop-out answer. I'll say everything in equilibrium. So everything in a bit of a balance. None of those things are more important than the other. We want guys who've got some of those raw attributes, because if, like I mentioned the batting example earlier, if you don't have great hand-eye coordination, you probably pick length a bit slower and you might not strike as cleanly. Doesn't make it impossible. You can still get there with hard work. Of course you can. But we also want, Ali used the phrase earlier, method is probably more important than technique. You've got to have a method that can cope with the challenge. So as a batsman, a good example is you've got to be able to deal with the problems that a bowler's throwing your way. And what are the problems that you faced? You've normally got a fast bouncing ball, a swinging ball, or a turning ball. Probably the things you've got to be able to deal with. Can you deal with those in your own way? And if you can deal with it at a level, if you go up a level and it gets a little bit tougher and quicker and more challenging and more pressure, can you still deal with it? And if your technique and method can do that, well, great. I don't think there's a rule book for it. And then we've talked about all the other things as well. Certainly if we're talking about international cricket, having the ability to cope with time away from home. And, one of the things that our England players often talk about, the thing that hits them harder than anything else is the scrutiny. The scrutiny of playing international cricket, when all of a sudden you play county cricket when your members might watch you and there's local media, you get onto the international radar and you could be playing your first game and at the lunch interval of a test match they're dissecting your technique on Sky, and it's a load of former England captains doing it, and that's playing in the changing room, and then you've got to go out and bat or bowl after lunch. So look, all of those things are important. So that's why I said everything in equilibrium. Every player is different, every selection is different. All of those ingredients are important, and that's why it's so exciting. As people who pick teams or try and coach people, as everyone on this call does, that's why it's so exciting. Like, there's no right or wrong.
I think, Farouk, I would say to Prash, Farouk, to be honest, one thing I would say is I massively believe in balance in everything. And where I see that imbalance is I see a lot of one-to-one indoors being done. And one-to-one indoors imbalance, especially with the context, especially with a coach who sees the player play regularly and can work with the player, that's fine. But what I see is a lot out of context, where a coach just sees a player indoors, never sees them play. And the danger with indoor coaching one-to-one is as soon as you've got a net round you as a coach, you get drawn into the technique and away from the person's effectiveness in a game. Mm. And we all know the great stories of Sachin Tendulkar, his development, where his dad would get him on, and take him to one game in the morning, and he'd bat, and then he'd take him to another game and he'd bat, and basically learned the game by playing in the game. And obviously he did a lot of practice and those things, net practice. But I think we have to try and I would encourage parents to do one-to-one, but ultimately players have to learn to play the game. And if it is one-to-one, I would encourage it to be quite game specific and not too much technical stuff. Obviously you have to address technique, as Mo said, but sometimes I see there's an imbalance of technique over everything else.
And certainly in some cases, and I'm not sure we've nailed this as a sport, but there are some parts of technique or method that transcend across all players. We call them the basics. Like an important one for a batter is being able to read length quickly and then move forward and back dynamically. If you can't do that, you're going to find it quite hard to play at the highest level. So there are some basic elements that are important, but those things are probably things that are different to what position your elbow's in, or small details like that, which probably don't quite matter quite so much. So as a game, I'm not sure we're that clear on which things matter most and which things you can have some flex or adaptability with, or even which things develop and present earlier and which things are easier to teach over time. Like, take fast bowling as an example. It's probably far simpler to teach someone to bowl with control than it is for them to bowl with pace. but we still pick young players because they bowl accurately. Well, I'm not sure that's a smart thing to do. So I'm not sure we worked that out yet, Farouk, which is why it's quite complex. But ultimately, you know, going back to what Ali said as well, we need a bit of balance. We need a bit of everything, and hopefully over time we can start to understand skill acquisition and skill development a little bit better.
Is it much of a cultural issue rather than other things? Because obviously, if you look in places like the subcontinent, where younger players, more raw players, are thrown straight in there, just going. You take the example of Hasnain at the moment for Pakistan. You've had all sorts of other players, Wasim and Waqar going for. They're just thrown in there as raw cricketers. Whereas in the English game, we tend to be a bit more reserved, a bit more cautious, more about letting them loose in that international arena.
Well, maybe. So historically, maybe. But I'd also say that's not a fair comparison. How much time on task has a Indian 18-year-old played cricket versus an English 18-year-old? You know, I've done numerous tours to the subcontinent, and every time I go there, and I love touring subcontinent, you know, particularly India. I love touring India, but I've been to Bangladesh as well, and the UAE. I've been to Sri Lanka, and every time we go, you see the volume and quality of cricket that young players play there, and it's no surprise that their players are further ahead than ours. You know, their training and playing age is significantly more. You know, an 18-year-old spinner would have bowled so much more than an 18-year-old spinner in this country. So it's not really fair to compare those two things, if I'm honest with you.
Okay. Min, can you just come in on this one? I don't want to ask the Leicester boys because I think it might be a bit biased and it puts them in an awkward situation.
That's exactly where you should go with this question. That's exactly where you need to go with it.
A 15-year-old spinner at Leicestershire. He wants to be a professional stroke inside cricket. What advice would you give him for the future as someone who's played Test cricket?
My advice.
They play for Kent, Min.
Come down to Kent, yeah. Get over the Dartford Bridge. My advice would be some of the stuff we've discussed at length on this call, which is become an all-rounder, play lots of other sports, develop your other skills. You're a left-arm spinner, absolutely. If you're good enough with that skill, do the other skills leave you exposed. So can you hold a bat well enough? Can you feel well enough? If you can't, then you better be Shane Warne or Muralitharan. So it's having multi dimensions to just not being a left arm spinner. Can you add to that skill set? And one thing that's absolutely imperative in all of this is the ability to dominate at whichever level you're asked to dominate, and then find the challenge at the next one. And can you overcome that hurdle as well? So if you're playing Leicester under 15s, can you dominate the under 15s, and can you go and do the same next year at the 16s, EPP and academy? If you're not dominating, try and understand and work out what it is. Is it my skill? Is it my mindset? Have I got to be a bit more resilient? Have I got to have a thicker skin? Whatever it is, at some point you have to dominate to get to the next one, and then you have to dominate again to go on again.
There you go, Danielle. Wise words from a former Test cricketer. Jigger, I'm going to come with you on the next one. It's about having to deal with multiple coaches. You get information overload. This guy tells you this guy tells you that. No doubt, growing up as a young cricketer, you will have experienced that at first hand. How do you basically, filter out the words that you don't want and sort of take on board the advice that you think is of benefit to you?
It's difficult, that, because I went through my career where I had so many coaches throwing in different things from all angles. But I was more experienced at the time to understand what worked for me. I say for a youngster, it's definitely worth trying something, depending on who's telling you sort of what to improve at. It's definitely worth trying it. Because ultimately, as a youngster, you want to improve. So if someone's saying something to you, my mindset was, right, let me try it. And if it makes me better, I'll carry on with it. Ultimately, it's and there's a lot of this happening now, is a player in the pathway will sort of have a county coach, a school coach, a club coach, a one-to-one personal coach maybe. And there's so many different things. It's ultimately, as coaches, it's probably our duty to sort of try and speak to each and every sort of coach to get one sort of individual message to the player. But again, it's what works. If it works for you, you carry on with it, I reckon.
I think the key there is trying to get alignment between the stakeholders at kids development. We always talk about it, and it's an easy thing to talk about, and it's far greater in reality to try and achieve that. But we always talk about, can we get alignment between various coaches involved in this player's development, and we constantly strive to try and do it, but it's a tougher ask than it should be.
And
What you
Farouk,
would all, sorry, Mo.
no, go on, you go, Ali.
I was going to say what you always want from a player is them to be open to coaches, so that the danger is that it becomes very, a player becomes closed to the different input. And in an ideal world, that person needs one person that they really trust that they can go to, and then they take all that information, and then that one person helps them filter it and get to something that's reasonable. But what you really want is players who are open as much as possible to coaching, because it's all valuable. It's all valuable insight to them being more aware about their game. So that's really important, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, Farouk, it's a good question because it's the reality of what faces a lot of young people, particularly in a day and age where there's so many coaches. And what it should do for the coaches on the call, never mind the players, it should remind us all of the level of responsibility that we have. Because ultimately we're dealing with a lot of young people's dreams and in some cases their careers and livelihoods. So it is important to remember the level of responsibility that we have and to take that responsibility seriously. So if you're going to try and teach, which coaching is what it should be, if you're going to try and teach, you should be teaching stuff that's worthwhile for that individual at that time. And often I talk about the right thing at the right time for the right person. So, we're dealing with Jigger on one day could be different with coaching Jigger on another day because his mood changes, his environment changes. The second thing I'd say is for the player themselves to be quite clear about their own strengths. It's important that they know what has got them so far. Now, they shouldn't be anchored to those because they might need to adapt and grow their strengths. But ultimately, it's important to stand true to the things that you feel most strongly about, your identity as a cricketer, because that's why we play. We play because we enjoy doing something. So if there's a type of way that you like to play your game, well, stand true to that. And don't be afraid to say to a coach, no, look, I like doing it that way. So long as it, as Ali said, it isn't a case of you being close to learning or improving. We can still improve our strengths. And then the final bit just repeats everything the guys have said around being really curious. Like, the best players in the world, and I'm talking about, at least in our country, you talk about the likes of James Anderson, Stuart Broad, Joe Root, Joss Butler, Jofra Archer, all of those guys. When you watch them practice closely, they're all desperate to improve their games, and many of them have done a lot of great things already. So if they're prepared to improve, why wouldn't teenagers? So, and I'm sure it's the same all around the world with all of the best players. Those who want to do great things work the hardest at their games. So for me, being really curious and being prepared to do a bit of trial and error and make a few mistakes, I think that's okay.
I just want to sort of open this up and we can go around the group on this one. The phrase multiple eyes, multiple times. Obviously, within our BAME communities, we're very, very quick at times to sort of play the race card if our child isn't selected or isn't deemed to be good enough for a particular county age group or a particular team. But obviously, this whole idea of multiple eyes, multiple times is sort of a way around that particular accusation. So I'll go with Ali first. Ali, if you want to just sort of elaborate for the benefit of those that are watching, what we actually mean by multiple eyes, multiple times in terms of a talent ID process.
Well, I mean, it's pretty straightforward from a cricket point of view, because especially something like batting, skill of batting, you go as a scout to watch or as someone watching a player once and he gets first ball, he doesn't become very memorable, does he? So with the idea of multiple eyes multiple times is that you need to see someone a lot really to be able to make a judgment on them. And we always talk, I often say at Leicester, it's one of the things that's wrong with a trial system is you need to be able to see them a lot, and I find it very, very hard to make decisions on players from seeing them once. So I think all county talent pathways, I'm sure Min's exactly the same at Kent, will be trying to have lots of people that they trust around, and I know I've certainly got built up a number of people that I trust who can help me make decisions or see lots of different players, and I honestly believe, and this is, like I said, I've only been doing this job 12 months at Leicester, but I've done similar jobs elsewhere. And I don't think you have to make too many decisions on players because it sort of happens naturally if you let it. I think at times, as Mo suggested, we're too quick to want to make that decision or want to identify someone or deselect someone as opposed to letting the process take care of itself. So that's my take on that. Really, is give people enough chance to either succeed or fail. Is my view.
Min, do you want to come in on that as head of pathway coach, do you often have difficult sort of decisions to make, and you have to sort of go with a gut feeling sometimes, even when you haven't really had ample opportunities to view a potential cricketer?
Well, we're fortunate actually out of the mess that was COVID's cricket in summer that we actually were able to play a lot more internal cricket. So our age group programs were playing internally, and as a group of county age group coaches, they were able to see a lot more players, and we had a lot more coaches seeing these players. So it goes back to Ali's point that actually one lad who has a bad day or gets sawn off with a bad decision, actually we've seen him 3 or 4 times across the summer. But what's also valuable in this process is having guys who are helping you make those decisions that aren't scared of voicing an opinion. And if that opinion is different to everyone else, I think it's absolutely invaluable to make sure you've got a wide range of scouts that are offering a different skill sets in terms of some guys are good on game management, some guys are good on seeing the technical eye, but what you want are guys that also are happy to voice their opinion. And that adds to that multiple times.
Mo, do you want to add anything to the discussion on that particular point?
Yeah, well, I'll give you quite a literal definition in that we're clearly trying to avoid someone seeing something once and get to a point where lots of people see something lots of times in different scenarios and contexts. And that just means we're better informed in our decision making. And I would say if we're either at what we feel is an important selection point and we feel like we don't know enough about the player, probably because we don't, and we shouldn't make a decision, is the reality of it. So the challenge is being armed with enough information that's fairly rich, but also as objective as possible so that we can make informed decisions, basically. So probably quite an obvious point, Farouk, but yeah, it's an important one to stress.
And Chigga, any thoughts from you?
No, just echoing on what the guy said, it's important to have a team which you trust in terms of the multiple eyes. But it's, again, like Min said, it's about having a different sort of perspectives as well in terms of is someone going to challenge you. And yeah, touching on Ali's point as well in terms of is there going to be a safety net for these guys? Is it just a yes or no, or is it let's have a look in another year's time sort of thing?
And I think, Farouk, with that, we Ali made a good point that we're in a rush to make decisions sometimes. Even if we are making decisions, because sometimes we have to, like you can't field 15 players in the team, you need to pick 11. So like we get it, we have to. But we should try not to be too severe in those judgments. Like we often look at a young player and think, well, they haven't got it. That's quite a tough and severe thing to say. So instead of thinking that someone's not good enough, we might want to replace that by saying, well, maybe they're not ready yet. Some people may never be ready. That's the reality of it. But not ready yet is a far safer and fairer approach than, taking this concept of they're not good enough, which I think is very binary and very unfair.
Min said, didn't he, earlier on about the way you do that. So I always think, a trial system for me, if you have to have trials because you have to get your squad down to a certain size and you do have to say to players, sorry, you're not in this squad or whatever, they have to have feedback. It's what Min was saying before. They have to be able to go away with something tangible, even if they don't like it. If they can go away with something tangible, I think that's really, really important. And I would just make sure that if anybody's listening who's at clubs around the Leicestershire area, I wouldn't want them to think, well, I've only seen that player once. I thought he was really good, but I'm not going to say anything because I've only seen him once. I think if you see anything in a player that's positive, you want to be able to pick up a phone to Min Patel in Kent and say, I've seen this lad, or Ali Maiden, or Jigger, or anyone, because that's what we're after. We're after that little bit of magic that everybody sees in someone at some point.
Gentlemen, we've been going for an hour and 20, and we could go on for another hour and 20 because there's a stack of questions here which I've not even managed to get through. But I am going to bring things to an end, and I just want to thank you all. But before we do actually finish the show, I'm just going to go around everybody once more and just sort of ask for your final sort of thoughts on words of advice that you can give to any young players who've got aspirations to play county cricket and eventually to go on to senior cricket with the England team, and obviously give them that positive little nugget. We'll go to you first, Mid, if that's all right, and then we'll go to Mo and Jigger and then finish with Alistair.
For me, the key to all of it is enjoyment, whether you're doing it at international level or at under 11s county level. You're doing it because you love the game. Playing at the right levels generally will help that. If you find you're at the wrong level and it's not enjoyable because it's too difficult or it's too easy, go and find the right level. And then the key is to dominate. If you're dominating, you'll keep moving forward.
Mo?
Yeah, probably a similar-ish point to Min's. It's easily done, and we're often comparing ourselves to each other, and young players will often want to be better than the next person, which is obviously fine. Different things motivate different people, but I'd say a healthier focus would be to love it more than anybody else. Because if you love it more than anybody else, the rest of it will probably take care of itself.
Jigger?
Without sounding too boring, I'd say have fun as well. You've got to be able to come in day out and still have fun and enjoy it. And the other biggest thing I'd say is keep coming back. So don't let any other sort of barriers or hurdles stop you. Just keep overcoming them, because county cricket, that sort of level of cricket does get hard at times. So it's about your ability to come back, keep coming back.
Before you go to Ali, can I just say, to love it and to have fun, make practice fun as well, because that's one surefire way to keep enjoying it. If you don't enjoy your practice, it can become pretty dull.
I think, I mean, I wrote down a few things before I came on air of the things that I'm looking for and that we're looking for. So I can do a bit more than one, actually. But I mean, I would completely echo the things the lads have said. And we've talked about them all already tonight. So athletic, because of broad athleticism. Skillful, obviously the game's a skill-based game. So that you have to be looking to be doing those things. You have to enjoy the game and love winning for your team that you're playing for. I think that is absolutely key. So, it's not about getting a 50 or getting 100, because it's about winning. It's what, get the score that's going to win your team that game. And I think that's absolutely crucial, because then it takes the emphasis away from your own fulfillment, your own to the team's success, which is what the game's about. Competitive, got to look to win games, like I said, but enjoying it's the most important thing, and not to compare yourself with other people's journey, because it will change all the time, and if you do that, the chances are you'll stop enjoying it, because you'll be worried about how you do the thing to be level with the fella who you're up against. So that's it, really.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you once again for giving up your time this evening. It's been a real pleasure just listening to your experiences. And I know that our viewers have enjoyed it, because I've had lots and lots of comments that I've not been able to put on air, and lots of questions, and on my phone as well. People have been WhatsApping. So thank you very, very much indeed. And as I say, for anyone else out there who's not been able to watch the show live, it is available on the NACC YouTube channel and on the NACC Facebook page as well. It's there for posterity, so feel free to go in there and obviously watch it over and over again. And hopefully, maybe in a few months' time, we may be able to get our guests back on again and explore other themes around the game and take advantage of their knowledge. So thank you for watching Middle Stump. I'm just going to remove my guests, but obviously they're going to stay with me, and do join us again next time.